Welcome, everybody, to Connecting the Universe. I'm author and researcher Mike Ricksecker, back at you out of the secret library of the Connected Universe. Not interactive tonight. We're not actually live this evening. So, this is something that's happened a few times here recently as I finish off the new book, Portals to the Stars. So, this is going to be coming out end of October. Inside Stargates, Atlantis, and Secrets of Ancient Egypt. It's been a lot of work coming down to the wire, a lot of things that I need to prepare, finish off all that. I am my own publisher. I publish a number of different authors, about 15. And of course, I handle my own work as well. So I have a bit of flexibility in order to do that. Anybody else, I would have had to have had the manuscript in long ago, or it would get pushed off to next year. But I'm getting this out in time for my Portals to the Stars special event, Rahway, New Jersey, November 9th, 2024. So go to my website. You'll find the links there to get tickets. Come join us. It's a special 4-part presentation that dives into portals, stargates, triangle areas of the world, time travel, consciousness, all kinds of wonderful, deep topics that we're going to get into and try to explain a lot of this interesting and fascinating phenomena that goes on around us on a daily basis. But we can trace so much of it back to ancient times. And I'll also provide those links down in the description so you have those in hand, MikeRicksecker.com and ConnectedUniversePortal.com. And how are some of these, dare I say, beings traverse the cosmos and come into our plane of existence, whether that's interdimensionally or across the universe. And so that's what tonight's episode is going to be about. In part, we're going to be covering UFO hotspots. So this is an archive episode out of the secret library of the Connected Universe. This was a members only episode. So those time travelers of the Connected Universe thus far are the only ones that have gotten a chance to watch or listen to this particular episode. So sit back, enjoy UFO hotspots. I think you will enjoy it. Welcome, everybody, to Connecting the Universe. I'm author and researcher Mike Ricksecker. Back at you. Happy New Year. We have returned. A little bit of a lengthy hiatus there, I know. But, coming right off of the new year last week, it was only a couple of days in there, and I wouldn't have been able to give you a fair enough class there. So, given a full week, we're going to get into this. We just had the watch party for UFO hotspots, and that is what we are talking about this evening. Only seems right to continue that conversation. And for those that are listening to the podcast version of this later, every Wednesday night, 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time, please join us out here live, ConnectedUniversePortal.com. 30-day free trial for this subscription too. Well, you get the weekly Connecting the Universe interactive class, sneak peek behind the scenes videos, monthly Q&As, exclusive articles, insider travel blogs, which are going to be greatly enhanced since we're going back to Egypt here in the next few weeks. Also American Southwest, Ireland, all kinds of great stuff. ConnectedUniversePortal.com. And there is Tom McNicholas in the house. Great to see you, Tom. So we got Tom, Jennifer, Sarah. All right. We are on the new platform for running the class. So I really appreciate everybody bearing with me as the change over the holidays. And we're going to see how this goes. All right. So let's get to the class question. I did not load up the photo for the class question. Sorry about that. But basically, and I'm going to have to bring it up here. Class question was, if the government would come completely clean, what's the UFO incident you most want answers about and why? And several of you did respond to that. Cheersty over there on the Instagram account said, definitely alien pancakes in Eagle River. So I know it sounds kind of silly, but for those that are not familiar with the story, 1961, Joe Simonton in Eagle River, Wisconsin, he came forward with this story that a spaceship had descended upon his farm, and the extraterrestrials that came out asked him for some water. Well, he noticed that they were cooking something, and he asked for a bite of what they were cooking. To him, it looked like pancakes and tasted awful.
So those are the alien pancakes. And he's ever since he told that story, he says that he regretted telling it because he caught a bunch of grief for it. So alien pancakes. Yeah, Tom. I know the pancakes, right? Dustin's pancakes. I know. All right. So Tom commented in here as well. He said, "What is the reason people were abducted, and what was done to them? If so, why are we being used as guinea pigs, and why would our government allow this?" Excellent question. Some people think that the government is behind it, that it's not actually aliens at all, that it's men in black, or you go back to like the MK Ultra days where they were testing LSD on people and things like that. Are they the ones that are actually abducting people? You see a lot of common stories between like the shadow phenomenon and the extraterrestrial phenomenon. So are these interdimensional beings, time travels, not necessarily from another planet? Yeah, there's a lot of questions behind that, and I'm with you. What's the real story behind there? Because there's a lot of variations. And Jin LeBay says all of it. Yes, come clean with all of it. Some of it would probably be very shocking. All right, so let's go ahead and that was a class question. Let's go ahead and get into our topic for this evening, UFO hotspots. So let's actually try to define a hotspot here. I'm just going to throw up the map of the Alaska Triangle. We're not really going to get into the Alaska Triangle tonight. We've talked about that at length. But basically, these are hotspots of UFO and supernatural activity in different areas of the world, which are seemingly more energetic in nature, and from which we receive a greater than average number of reports and sightings of strange phenomena, whether that's UFOs, supernatural activity, hauntings, cryptid sightings, and so on. They may be considered a triangle area or a vortex area, a location which has seen a plethora of anomalous activity. And basically, I just read straight from an answer that I had put together for the Ancient Aliens television show, which they didn't use. There was a lot of there were a lot of people that they featured in that particular episode. So I can just imagine, because they sit you down for an hour and ask you a whole variety of questions with the number of people that they had on there. They're just grabbing little snippets from everybody. But that was the definition that I gave them for a hotspot. And the one thing that they did actually feature on there was, if you look at the work of J. Allen Hynek in his UFO report, and this is what happened during the 60s when he was publishing his reports, and he had basically started to notice that many of these UFO reports were there were patterns, and one of those patterns was that the same locations, or at least relatively close to each other, were reporting these various sightings. And so what happened was, when he published these reports, this is the actual full book, the Hynek UFO report, UFO researchers flocked to these different areas, and they became the UFO hotspots. This is where people started going to a lot. Now, you would have some very sensationalized stories that would make the mass media, like Roswell, Phoenix Lights, which was a bit past Hynek's time. But when stories like that would come into the open, then people would flock to those areas. But not all of them were highly publicized like that. And so it took something like a compilation of thousands of reports for people to kind of start to take notice. Hey, there's a pattern here. And what's interesting about the Hynek report, well, I should say the public, geez, if I could speak properly, the Project Blue Book project. Project Blue Book findings, I guess you should say. There are still over 700 open cases left from Project Blue Book. There's a total of 13,000 of them, and they were able to deduce many of these reports, but 700 of them are still open. They could not find a reasonable explanation for them. And that's how Hynek started. He started really as a skeptic. He was brought in to basically go to these locations and define what exactly was going on. And he wasn't supposed to be coming away and saying, no, these are actually alien or extraterrestrial craft. This is whatever, scientific reason or explanation for the event. But after a while of investigating many of these reports, he started to realize himself that, no, there's actually something to this. Not all of these can just be explained away. And so that's historic photo of Hynek with some photos in hand. And then this is from the Project Blue Book television show, which was really good. It was very disappointing that History Channel canceled it, but they canceled it because they were going away from all their scripted shows. But it was pretty well received. Not historically accurate, but was quite entertaining and kind of put you on the path to wanting to research what had happened. So got some comments down here. Sarah's asking, do you think there is an increase of hotspot activity over time? I think it fluctuates. We're going to get into some different cases here, but like the Hudson Valley sightings, it was like a specific period of time where all of a sudden the activity was heightened and then it subsided. So it seems to kind of fluctuate at times. If that has anything to do with the Earth's magnetism, that ebbs and flows. Now, not all of the hotspots, UFO hotspots, have to do with the Earth's electromagnetism, although there is a correlation with that with many of them. Some seem to be more, strategic in nature. If you talked about the Alaska Triangle just at the very beginning, like Mount Hayes or Mount Denali or some of these other remote locations up there that are speculated to be UFO bases, it would make sense because it's very remote. People don't go out there, so that would make a lot of sense. Tom says, I believe that Area 51 test on the crashed spaceship led to the 1980s home computer boom. I think, okay, this is what I'll say about that. There may be some technology that was gleaned from there because there does seem to be a jump around that period of time, late 40s, early 50s, where we, were figuring out computing. Of course, we had Alan Turing, who basically developed, the real first modern computer, and that was to break the Enigma device during World War II. And then we basically took that and shrunk it down to, okay, we're going to use tubes and filaments. Then we turned it into the silicone microchip and all that. Now that could be the transition there. How do we figure out to use the silicone microchip? So if it's somewhere in there, that may be where it's at, which basically turned computers from massive, huge room-sized things to, what we're using today. Okay. So Tom is saying the new format doesn't allow me to watch this on my big TV. Okay. Appreciate the input on that. We'll see if there might be a way around that. At this point, not sure, but I'll definitely look that one up. Okay. So when we are looking at, as I mentioned briefly here, the solar occurrence of the Earth's energy grid, that sort of thing. We do find that many of these sightings are along either the lines or those what we call the energetic nodes, right? They're technically conductivity discontinuities, which is a mouthful. We call them hotspot nodes, for lack of a better term. And so I have a quote here from myself from the show where I say, if we're trying to solve a mystery, you want to go to a location that has the most clues. And these are the locations that could have the clues to connect our ancient past to our modern reality and perhaps give us the answers we're seeking. Because along these different nodes, you'll find, like the pyramids of Giza. You'll find the Bermuda Triangle. You'll find Stonehenge. You'll find the American Southwest, where there seems to always be something going on. We're going to actually focus a lot on the American Southwest with this particular class. Wasn't my original intention, but as I was putting things together for the class, that's just kind of where it ended up going. So we will start with kind of the most famous of them all, which is Roswell. So Roswell, 1947, and you guys probably know the controversy pretty well, where they had reported the crash of a flying saucer out there. When the debris was collected by Major Jesse Marcel, this is kind of the famous photo here, a press officer issued a statement on that July 8th, 1947, describing the crash and recovery of a flying disc. But the next day, there was a separate officer that stated, no, they recovered a weather balloon and not a flying saucer. Now, other witnesses in the area are like, no, this garbage that he's showing off here on the ground was not what crashed there. And that is always the big controversy. And you even have headlines. Now, this is the famous headline everybody is familiar with. RAAF, which is the Roswell Airfield. Maybe it's there's two A's. I forget what the other A is. Captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. But then you have another headline here: General Ramsey empties Roswell saucer. So you have more than one headline talking about a saucer crash, but yet military comes back and says, no, it's just a weather balloon, nothing to see here. Now, that wasn't the only sighting that summer. There are a lot of different sightings. Roswell gets most of the acclaim. But there's also June 24th, 1947, which was the Kenneth Arnold's sighting there at Mount Rainier. And that's basically where we get the term flying saucer, because that's the way he described it, was that they looked like saucers in the air. And we're talking about saucers that you'd put like a teacup or something like that on. We don't really use that term anymore these days, but they did back then, and that's what he related it to. And ever since then, it was known as flying saucers. Although we've kind of gone away from calling them flying saucers, because that terminology is, anybody who's used that term over the decades kind of got labeled a nut. So then we went to UFOs, which really the term UFO came out of Project Blue Book, J. Allen Hynek, and those guys. And then it was, no, if you're saying UFOs, then you're a nut. So now our modern term here is UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, which is really kind of over the last 20 years, because people do want to talk about this, but there's a stigmatism when you use the term UFO or flying saucer or something like that. So now we've come up with this other definition. I mentioned in, I think it was the Supernatural Hotspots class, I was like, we should just call it USA, unidentified stuff in the air, because there's a lot of stuff up there that we don't know what in the world's going on. Also, going back here again to Alaska, August 4th, 1947. So this would have been just after Roswell. Captain Jack Peck and co-pilot Vince Daly witnessed and followed a flying saucer northwest of Bethel, Alaska around sunset. So there was actually a lot going on that summer. And let's see here. And thank you, Roswell Army Airfield. Thank you, Jen. Appreciate that. Because yeah, it was still at that point. It wasn't the Air Force yet. It was the Army Air Corps, is what it was. The Air Force came out of the Army Air Corps, so that makes sense. Army Airfield. Thank you. And then there's the saucers or flying pie plates. Yeah, or frisbee, right? Or like the Back to the Future 3, where it picks up the pie plate that says frisbee on it and is far out. Yeah. All right. So sticking around the American Southwest, I said we were going to be there for a while this evening. Phoenix Lights. Some interesting stuff here with this. So this was 1997, so a little bit more recently. Widely cited by, I mean, there are hundreds of reports of these lights. They're in a V shape over the states of Arizona and Nevada. So it was, it took a great flight path. They were seen for quite a while. Hundreds of miles and hundreds of people saw them. Law enforcement agencies did report receiving hundreds of calls from witnesses about these strange lights. And yeah, a perfect V. Now, what's interesting is, okay, you see the V shape here, single lights like that. The story similar to this that we talked about on the Ancient Aliens episode was Hudson Valley. And again, you see V shape, but multiple lights. So you see here each one of these, and there's what, 7 lights, but each light is single, where here you have, it's like 6 lights, but they're tripled. A couple of them you can't see because it's just, you know, grainy footage. That's from 1984. So could be related because of the V shape, but the lights on the underside are done a little bit differently. Interesting story that came out of this that I guess I'll just kind of briefly say you may hear again here sometime in the coming months. It's actually by actor Kurt Russell. So he's actually a pilot, and he was there that night for the Phoenix Lights. And he revealed a few years ago that he was actually the pilot who first called in the Phoenix Lights while he was landing there that night. He and his son were on approach about a half mile out when they noticed 6 lights in a V shape that they couldn't identify. Russell says that he was stunned for a moment, but finally snapped out of it when his son Oliver asked what the lights were. He was like, oh, okay, you know. He admitted he had no idea and called it into air traffic control. After they landed, the incident completely escaped Russell's mind. A couple years later, his wife, Goldie Hawn, was watching a television show about UFOs featuring the Phoenix Lights. And the report seemed vaguely familiar to him, but he couldn't quite place it, at least at first. As the coverage continued, the television show mentioned a civilian pilot had called in the first sighting of the lights, and it suddenly dawned on Russell that it had been him. He likened the whole experience to what Richard Dreyfuss's character experiences in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And that's what a lot of different UFO researchers have kind of keyed in on with this report from Kurt Russell, is that that idea of lost time, that, you know, Tom, you had mentioned something about the abductions earlier, and people have been abducted, sometimes don't realize it. All they know is, hey, it was, you know, 2 o'clock, now it's 3 o'clock, what in the world happened? And all they remember is seeing something like a bright light, you know, or, you know, they witness a sighting, but for whatever reason, it's almost like their mind shuts off and they are suddenly, what's a good term to use here? That they're suddenly just, you know, nonplussed about the whole thing. There's a in the show Westworld, there's something built into the hosts in which if there's something around that they're not supposed to really see or notice or whatever, they're just like, doesn't look like anything to me, you know, which is kind of interesting. So they'll sometimes test the host and show them modern pictures. They're supposed to be in an old West town. They'll show them some modern pictures, and you know, they'll ask them to, you know, does this, you know, what does this look like to you? Doesn't look like anything to me. So it's almost like there's something that's been turned off when some of these sightings happen, which is kind of interesting. That seems to be what happened to Russell. So, all right, moving through the West. Let's see, we have comments or questions down here. Jedi mind trick, yeah, kind of like that. And Sarah, yeah, do you think he experienced a psychological reprogramming of the event? That is what some people speculate, that now he put it so far out of mind, and it took, you know, watching this particular episode for so long before it finally hit him that he was there at that time. And the Phoenix Lights were a big deal when it happened. You know, people that were there on the ground, noticing up in the air this stuff, you know, we're calling it in left and right. But he was basically right there by it. And so to him, you know, this should be something that was like more significant when he landed. You know, would have heard people talking about it after he landed because it was such a big deal and so many people had seen it. Nothing till 20 years later. Yeah, kind of interesting. Yeah, and Tom, that's an interesting point there. Same thing happened at Mineral Springs Hotel when we saw the little girl. Our minds didn't allow us to take a picture of her. Yeah, it was one of those where you just didn't even think about it at the time. You know, here we are, you know, 5 of us, seasoned paranormal investigators, and none of us thought to even, you know, I mean, I had a video camera around somewhere. Wasn't with me in the hall. I probably left it in Pearl's room, but we all had phones on us, and nobody thought to take out a phone and take a photo, run a little video, anything like that. None of us thought to do that. So it's kind of interesting what happens in those moments that you just, common sense sorts, it tends to just evaporate. So, all right, let us move on to Chaco Canyon. I really, really like Chaco Canyon. I spent an entire afternoon out there once and barely even scratched the surface. This is Pueblo Bonito, which is the most famous location that's out there, but they have a lot of these there, a lot of these pueblos. And absolutely fascinating. So this is not my photo, this aerial shot. You have to get special permission to do any drone footage or anything like that there. And I found that out while I was there. But yeah, from the ground, it's, you know, it's these ancient ruins and very, very mysterious. We don't know a lot about the people that had resided there. The Hopi believe that they are descended. We call them ancient Pueblans now. So just for reference, the term Anasazi, we're not supposed to use anymore. Apparently, that was an ancient Navajo derogatory term that they used to call these people that were there. And so when, you know, settlers came into the area, the English, the Americans, the us, when we came in and we started asking them, you know, who were these people who built these? And the Navajo didn't like them, so they told us they were the Anasazi. And so that was the term that we started using. Navajo's getting a big laugh out of it. While, yeah. So yeah, the Hopi believe that they are descended from them. We call them ancient Pueblans because we're not specifically sure. It's a long ago abandoned site. And you have these ceremonial areas, these circular ceremonial areas that we call kivas. And some of you may remember the one that I call the hot tub. Now, it's very possible that something like this small one, could have been used for some sort of ritual bath or something like that. That's a practice that's seen in many, many different cultures for some sort of initiation or transformation or something like that, where they will use these different ritual baths. But just the way the small pillars are done in there, they look like seats, and then you have that kind of hole there at the bottom that's like, oh, that could be the drain. So I've always called it the hot tub. But we don't know. But what's interesting, there are UFO sightings out in this area. This is a very, very highly energetic area. This was used primarily for ritual. This is not where they resided long term. This was a short-term site for these people. They would come and go, perform their rituals, and then they would leave again. But they left us things like the petroglyphs on the wall. You guys have heard me talk about the swirl patterns, the spirals that are on these walls, and they relate these to the star people, is what they call them. And so, the question becomes, of course, my colleagues there in Ancient Aliens, of course, relate this to the extraterrestrials interacting with the people. Whether they were or not, we don't know for sure. It's a possibility. But there apparently was some sort of celestial activity going on there that they recorded there on these on the walls there. And this is really like just right behind. If you look here at Pueblo Bonito in this photo here, and those that are listening to the podcast version later, if you want to actually see the photos, I'm going to play a video here shortly. Please join us, connecttheuniverseportal.com every Wednesday night. To the right here on the wall are these petroglyphs. Probably, I don't know, maybe 100, 200 feet down that wall. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and play a short video clip here for you.
On the stone behind me are petroglyphs, and this is actually called Petroglyph Trail, because all along the canyon walls here are a number of different petroglyphs, which is basically the ancient artwork from the Anasazi culture that had been here. It's left up to us to try to decipher what these things mean. You can see kind of the swirl shape behind us, and that is in a number of these different petroglyphs. So some things that they may be spirit portals, some think that they may represent the actual galaxies above, a lot of different things, spirit energy. But we actually see this swirl pattern in a lot of different ancient cultures, not just here, but all over the world, which makes you question again the tie-in of ancient cultures all across the globe, even though they are separated by thousands and thousands of miles across continents, but yet they still have some sort of apparent connection.
All right, there we go. And see, I used the term there before I was told otherwise. So I do apologize for that, but that's why I explained that to start. Next time we go back to Cholla Canyon, I will use the correct term, ancient Pueblans. But yeah, you guys have seen me talk about the spiral and the swirl patterns all over the world. There were some photos there from Newgrange in Ireland, which we didn't get to last time around. We're going to make sure we get to that next time around. There was Sardinia. All over the world, you see that pattern. And there it was, Cholla Canyon, American Southwest. They've also seen that near Skinwalker Ranch. I'm not going to go a ton into Skinwalker here, because we did touch on that during the supernatural hotspots. We went into that at length. But this is another location there in the American Southwest that has a lot of activity, and this one is very, very active. The UAPs that are seen around the mesa are extenuous. There are several that are seen on a very, very regular basis. In the mesa here, has a lot of strange electromagnetic activity associated with it. Some people believe that there is actually a UFO that is buried within the mesa. I mean, we don't know. You'd have to go digging into there. And they did drill into that. We featured that on the last time that we covered Skinwalker, and the strange types of metals that they retrieved from there that are very, very rare. Then there's again, it's a triangle area there on Skinwalker Ranch. Now it's a triangle area because of the roads that they built. So that's why it looks like a triangle. But it's another location there where they get a lot of strange activity. A lot of the UAPs that they see there seem to be directly above it, and they have actually, been measurable, the electromagnetic activity that's rising out of there. There's also a stone circle that is right there. So, that's another thing that we tend to see in common with some of these locations is they will have, these ancient pieces of architecture there, ceremonial sites. We saw that just a moment ago with Cholla Canyon. You see that here with a stone circle, and we'll touch on that very briefly here toward the end later, because we will mention Stonehenge, of course, but yeah, it's these type of things that that we call our hotspot areas. We have that. When we talk about the energy in the area at a place like Skinwalker, it's really like the whole American Southwest. There's something about that area, and it very well could just be the metals and minerals in the ground. Because what happens is, and you guys have heard me talk about this before, the core of our Earth is molten iron, and it's spinning, it's moving, it's, there's an ebb and a flow to all of that. The Earth also rocks back and forth a bit. There's a wobble that, that's where we get our precession from. And as that spins and creates a magnetic field, which protects our planet from the solar winds, it passes through different metals and minerals in the ground, and as magnetic fields pass into those different metals, they create additional fields or other fields, whether it's quartz, could be other metals, could be water, that sort of thing. And you'll have some areas that are stronger than others and that sort of thing. Couple comments here. Yeah, I definitely need to take a trip out there. And yeah, I remember, Tom, I think you sent me that that audio clip from Dustin. Yep. All right. So other areas in the American Southwest, you have the Sedona area, which is absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. And there's Cathedral Rock, which I dropped my old video camera off of, and it broke. Tried to fix it, and when I opened it up, there's pieces falling out. So I was like, yeah, I think it's done. So now I have this video camera. But yeah, absolutely beautiful area. And this is a location where, people, that are involved with supernatural, paranormal fields, spirituality fields, they flock there. It's like a mecca for this type of research and meditation, that sort of thing. People go there for that because of the energy that is out there. People talk about there being portals. You just walk along a path, and people have experienced different portal activity out there. I did not while I was walking around out there, trying to find it. I had my tri-field meter going and see if I could find a more energetic spot, see if I could get sucked into a portal and go back in time or forward in time, or maybe transported somewhere. People talk about that. It happens. Where people will be, walking along a path, and all of a sudden they're somewhere else, or somebody that was next to them suddenly disappears. It's bizarre when that happens. But there in Sedona, people talk more of it's more of a positive energy that people use that energy to. And Jen, you would probably know more about this sort of thing with your meditation, that they will use that energy to align themselves. You have people that go out there with their crystal collection to get their chakras all aligned and correct and everything. That's huge out there. You also have a lot of sky watching out there. People will go to Sedona to watch the skies, and people report seeing a lot of UFOs and UAPs out there in the Sedona area. Then there's not too far from Sedona, it's just right down the road, you have Montezumas Castle and Montezuma's Well. There's some really, really interesting legends that come out of these areas from the ancient Native American tribes as to what happened here. And there's still an energy about these places. And I have it's a little bit of a longer clip here to play. I played it a long time ago when we did the American Southwest stuff. So that would have been October 2021. So it's been a little while since you guys have seen this.
Okay, I am here at Montezuma's Well, kind of panning around a little bit so you can get a view of that. It is a pretty cool little area. So there are origin stories here for the Native Americans, and kind of depends on who you listen to. So if you do some searches on the internet, you're going to find stories about a girl that was sealed up in a hollow log. If you talk to somebody like Clifford, who is a Zuni elder who is actually ousted from his order and from the Zuni culture because he was, I guess, talking about stuff he shouldn't have been talking about. He has a little bit of a different story to tell about that. And my co-hostess Victoria would love it because it has to deal with underground stuff and ant people and all of that. And so basically the idea is during the destruction of Lemuria, the ant people helped the ancient Lemurians hide underground. It also has some interesting information about basically Japanese that came over, Chinese. There's supposed to be some Chinese petroglyphs out amongst some of the other stuff, the other regular petroglyphs. So now I will say that this is kind of secondhand in some ways. I know Clifford, and we met last June at the UFO Mega Conference. We actually talked about what he called the raw people, and basically I was asking about shadow people. And so he told me in their culture they would call them the raw people, the interdimensional beings. So that's what Clifford and I mostly talked about, was the raw people and shadow people, interdimensional type beings. We didn't talk about this together. So this information actually comes secondhand through James Keenan, who does all the Uinta Basin stuff, Skinwalker Ranch, and all of that. He and I were chatting at the Las Cruces Paracon about basically where I was gonna be, and he said, "Check this place out. This is what Clifford says about it." And I tried digging up some old podcasts with Clifford and listening to them, see if he talked about it a little. He did a little bit, not necessarily Montezuma as well, but like with Lemuria and the ant people and all that. So basically, the idea is that the ancient peoples were saved by the ant people, brought underground. Victoria's going to say Hollow Earth. I'll just say large underground caverns where they could live for a while, and then when the time was right, they came back up out. And so this is supposed to be the access point where they came out, and then they repopulated the earth after the great cataclysm, after the great disaster, whether that was the flood. They do talk about the flood story and all that stuff. But I'm going to have to research to put all the pieces together for this particular story with the well and the origins and all that, and where the
flood fits in or if it was a different cataclysm. But in any case, still very interesting that this would have been potentially an access point. They've had, just doing a little bit of research on the well itself, it's hard for like fish to live in here. Fish can't live in here. It's too heavily carbonated. So they have some other smaller, like leeches live around here, some small weird shrimp type things. I guess there's like 5 species of animals that live in here, but most can't. I saw some, ducks swimming around, but they can swim. That's fine. They're not living in the water. They're not really sure how far down this goes, which kind of leads into the legend and the tale and everything, because when they have they've had divers in here, they can only get so far. They've tried to put robots down into there, they get pushed back out. So they're having a very, very hard time actually researching the depths of this. They do not know how far down it goes and where all it goes. So it leads you to question, are those like the underground caverns that the ancient Lemurians had lived in long, long ago, that's now filled in with water and is inaccessible? Is that where, they came out of, and being helped by the ant people down there? And when we talk ant people, we're talking, listening to Clifford. So like they had translucent ones that were about 2.5 feet tall, and then I guess some red ones that were like a couple feet taller than that. So they weren't any more than like 4 feet tall, but they stood erect. And he made comments about, put, an ant, a praying mantis, and then an ET next to each other, and you can like see an evolutionary type process from one to the other. So it's kind of interesting. So were they possibly ETs that had helped the ancient cultures, protected them here until the earth was habitable again?
Yeah, so Montezuma as well. And Clifford. So I had tried to coordinate with Clifford to be able to talk to him a little bit more about all of that. And unfortunately, he passed away shortly thereafter. But he was a Zuni elder who had no problem coming forth with a lot of the different stories from their culture. Not a lot of the different Native American cultures have restrictions about what their elders can talk about and divulge. But Clifford believed that, a lot of their history, which, they had many oral traditions, a lot of their history was passed down by story, through, orally. And he believed that many of those stories were being lost, that there was information there that the people needed to know that was being restricted, and over time, would be forgotten for all time. So he was doing what he could to bring those stories forward. And so at some point along the way, they ousted him from his eldership, unfortunately. And then it was I think it was a little over a year ago now that he passed away. So it's which is sad, but great guy. I love sitting down and talking with him. Just so many interesting stories, so insightful. Fantastic guy. And so in any case, so I saw that there was a question there from Sarah. If the Lemurians were hidden there, did they bring any of the technology? Well, it was during the cataclysm. So I'll say this, when the people emerged from there, they basically became the culture that inhabited that area. And you're seeing the mud brick structures there of Montezuma's Castle, which really isn't a castle. It's just it's in the cliff there, and you can kind of see it's the cliff dwellings there in the rock above the well. Montezuma's Castle is basically a larger version of that. So during the cataclysm that they fled from, apparently, if they had some advanced technology, it would have been lost during
either during that cataclysm, or we don't really know how long they are supposed to have stayed down underground. Could have been lost during that. We don't know. Or at least I don't. That might be something to research a little bit deeper into. And I saw Jen here mentioned when she was at Sedona, she said, yes, I meditated in an energy vortex in Sedona. It was mostly peaceful except for a noisy hiker. So very cool. And yeah, you mentioned that before, Montezuma's Castle with the bubonic plague squirrels. Yeah, there was bubonic plague does still exist, and the squirrels out west there are known to have it. So don't play with the squirrels out there. All right, so we've done a lot here with the American Southwest. A couple other things here I want to throw out real quick. If you go a little bit further west from there, you end up in a little bit. San Diego area offshore has had some recent sightings here. This is an image from Jeremy Corbell. He has actually a video clip from this from the U.S. Navy off the USS Omaha. This was featured in the Ancient Aliens episode. But basically, it was July 15th, 2019. U.S. Navy's Combat Information Center of the USS Omaha picked up what was dubbed a swarm of UFOs on radar. This is just one screen cap from that. Speeds reach as much as 160 miles per hour. Some of these UAPs appeared as lights in the sky, while others were reported to have slipped in and out of the sea. So there is an idea there that has been pretty prevalent for a long time that there is an underwater base there. It would be a USO base, unidentified submerged object. That's off the coast there. So obviously, with San Diego having a massive military presence, could certainly be of interest to UFOs, studying U.S. forces. And there have been hundreds of UFO sightings in and around the San Diego area for decades. So that's to the west. Now, if you go further east from the American Southwest, at least that corner area, you run into Marfa, Texas, and there's the Marfa lights. They have actually built a viewing station for people to watch the lights. The state has built a viewing station for people to watch the Marfa lights. And this is, it's interesting. This is a type of phenomenon that occurs in a lot of different areas, like Miami, Oklahoma. They have the Miami lights. There's the Hebron lights out in Maryland. There are locations that have these strange lights like this. Now, my colleagues, Andrew Collins, would probably liken this to plasma phenomenon. He was also featured on this past episode of Ancient Aliens. His book with Gregory Little, Origins of the Gods, gets into that. A lot of what they covered with the Chasm Cave, which they spent like all of 5 minutes on it in the episode. A ton of information on the Chasm Cave in here. I highly recommend the book because it gives you another perspective of what some of this phenomenon could be. Of course, it would still be a UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, because it's some sort of light that we don't quite understand. We can't identify it just yet, but it could be some sort of plasma event. And then you start asking the question, okay, so if it is, are there different organisms and beings and things like this that live within the plasma? It's taking a step far there, and we're not going to get into all that this evening, but we will get into just a few minutes here because we're starting to run out of time. The Chasm Cave. This is another area where another area of the world in which a lot of these different things are seen. This is northwest of Jerusalem, near Tel Aviv. It's found in 2000 during road construction, but the site itself it was occupied from 400,000 years ago to about 200,000 years ago. So it had 200,000 years of occupation. But this is like one of the oldest active sites in the world. And it blew researchers away when they were digging this up, because stone tools are found. there's evidence that they preserved their food. So these are things that humans were not supposed to have 400, 200,000 years ago. The other big thing that they had evidence of was religious ceremonies and shamanism. Now, previously, we had only seen that about as far back as 40,000 years ago, 30 to 40,000 years ago. You see, like in cave art in Europe, the idea that there were some religious ceremonies that were performed there. But hundreds of thousands of years ago, it's really just unheard of. So what Collins and Little ask basically is, why were they performing religious rituals? Why was shamanism a practice back then? What brought them to doing all of this? And right around that area, just to the east, I guess it would be a little to the northeast of there, is Mount Gerizim. Now, I'm not going to get into everything because this is an extremely religious site. I'm not going to get into all of that. But basically, it's a sacred site to the Samaritans. This is where Jacob had his dream of the ladder, Jacob's ladder. Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal stand opposite each other. And this was really kind of like the heart of Israel at the time that the Israelites entered into the area with Joshua. Ancient city of Shechem lies in the valley right between the two. And there is an altar there, which is believed to be the altar of Joshua. When they brought the Ark of the Covenant forward and he read the words of the law, all of that stuff. So all of that aside, on Mount Gerizim, over the millennia, lights have been seen on the mountain, which people in the area have attributed to angels. So, you have all of this fantastic religious tradition there between Jacob and Joshua, all the things that have been done and performed there. But yet, the question, I guess, that is being asked here is, were they drawn here because of the lights that were seen there, which people today would call UAPs? The religious tradition is that there's some sort of angels, and Collins and Little are proposing that perhaps it's some sort of plasma event. But they take that back to the inhabitants of the Chasm Cave, which they would have been able to see Mount Gerizim from where they're at in the cave. Do they see this on such a regular basis that they started performing their rituals in honor of the lights that they were seeing on top of the mountain? So again, we're talking hotspot areas. I'm going to go back south here a little bit to Jerusalem real quick. And this is controversial, and I get that. Of course, you're talking about a location in which, many religions have, their sacred sites here between Judaism, Christianity, and, right now you have the Dome of the Rock with the Muslims there. So you have those three primary religions that all call this a sacred site. And this photo here is actually a video clip. It is highly controversial, but basically there was this UAP, or anomalous ball of light, that was seen hovering over the Dome of the Rock and then shot up into the air. And skeptics have tried to call this a hoax, but there's not one definitive thing in which they've been able to state this is why it's a hoax. So, the UAP community is like, well, it's still a possibility that it is real. So there is a conflict there as to whether or not the footage is real or was faked. It hasn't been proven one way or the other. But again, we have a very highly energetic sacred site, and it has been that way for thousands and thousands of years. And apparently with the Chasm Cave, hundreds of thousands of years, which again is almost impossible to fathom, but there it is. So I was going to swing back around and talk about Stonehenge here real quick. We did hit on that with the Stonehenge hippies before, but this is, when we talk about our stone circles, and we talked about that earlier briefly with Skinwalker Ranch. They have a stone circle there. You have a lot of these stone circles around the world. Ancient Egypt, you have Nat the Playa with the stone circles. Of course, you have the pyramids there, where all kinds of different things have been seen and witnessed and observed. But these different power sites around the world like this seem to attract this type of activity and behavior. And even if it's not ETs, even if it's not extraterrestrials, there's still the possibility that it could be ultra terrestrials or some sort of interdimensional being, something like that. It could be energy that is opening into, other places in the universe or other dimensions within our own planet. You see these ideas of stargates and portals and things like this. We don't quite understand all of that yet. They're trying to actually create them in the lab. They have stated now, it was about a month and a half ago now, where they stated we created a small wormhole in the lab. So, it's being done, even, scientifically, not just, hey, we saw something, there's energy in the ground. We have these different ideas. They're actually producing things like this in the lab now. And that is seemingly attracting a lot of this different behavior. And yeah, Tom, exactly. There always be two sides to everything. Well, three sides to every story, right? Yeah. Yours, mine, and the truth. So to me, it's always somewhere there in the middle. And I think the disciplines need to come together and realize that it is somewhere in the middle, that, you could use one to almost prove the other, not wholly, but at least in part. And if each side would be open-minded to each other, I think they'll find that the answer is somewhere in the middle there. So, all right, everybody, that is going to do it for our first Connecting the Universe class of 2023. Really appreciate you guys joining us tonight on the new platform. We'll see how this goes. I would prefer to keep this out here rather than do the whole Facebook thing. So, that would kind of keep everything all inclusive in one little place there on connecteduniverseportal.com. So, again, Happy New Year. And until next time, if time really exists.